Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Typically, I try to speak to you from the chapel. Today, I'm in the apartment. This week, on Shabbat, we're going to begin, or the Jewish people worldwide is going to begin reading the book of Bamidbar, the book in the wilderness. If you read through the fourth book of the Torah, which we call, thanks to the Latin, we call the book of Numbers because of its many censuses, it can seem like a book of failure, a book of great struggles, in which case the term Bamidbar, in the wilderness, is pretty much a negative designation. They're walking through the very, very difficult circumstances. And in fact, reading through the book of Bamidbar, it is a story very often of failure. It's a story of rebellions like Korach's rebellion against Moses. It's a story of Moses' own failure in hitting the rock and not speaking to it, thus dooming himself to exile. It's a story of faithlessness like the spies, lots of complaining about the food, lots of struggles on the part of the people. And so walking through the wilderness can seem like a pretty bad place to be. There's another approach in Jewish tradition, especially in Midrashic, but also in biblical tradition. And I would say for my own personal spiritual life, this is true too. There's a way of looking at the desert that is absolutely wonderful. The desert, Midbar Sinai, is a place of spiritual elevation. In addition to complaining about the food, in addition to the lack of water, in addition to the deaths of Aaron and Miriam, it's also in Jewish tradition from time to time and in certain kinds of midrashic approaches, a place where the people are wrapped in clouds of divine glory, where they experience great intimacy with God. And the most important thing that happens Bamidbar Sinai, in the first words of our Parshat, in the wilderness of Sinai, is of course the giving of the Torah. I'd say in my own spiritual life, I love the desert. I love being in the land of Israel, particularly in the Negev, in the area around the Dead Sea, the majesty, the rawness, the vastness, the way in which a human being can feel so small before the really kind of terrifying vastness of open space in the desert is its own great spiritual feeling. The book of Jeremiah, in a passage which we read among other times on Rosh Hashanah, has this great image of the people's faithfulness and love for God being exemplified by their willingness to walk into the very forbidding desert as part of their own journey. Zacharti lach chesed ne'urayich ahavat kilulotayich. I remember your young love for me. Lechtech acharai b'midbar be'eretz lo zeruah. I remember you left Egypt, you had this faith, I asked you to walk into the desert, you walked behind me into this dark desert. I personally feel in the open spaces of the desert, that feeling of, on the one hand, human smallness, on the other hand, faith in God. And it's no secret, no surprise that in Judaism, all the way back to, for example, the Dead Sea Scroll sect, or in various other kinds of religions, such as the ancient Christian fathers, the desert was a place of attraction for people. And as I mentioned, on this day, as we're heading into, today happens to be the 43rd day of the Omer. We're only a few days away from Shavuot, the holiday of the giving of the Torah. It's impossible not to read that word Bamidbar Sinai, as also connoting the gift of the Torah. So with that in mind, I'd like to look with a positive eye towards the desert at a couple of really well-known, deep, famous, justly famous midrashim about the gift of the Torah in the desert. One of these midrashim comes from an ancient book called the Mechilta, which is the Mishnaic era, that is to say, somewhere around the year 250 or so in the 3rd century CE, midrash on the book of Exodus. And that midrash wrestles with the question of why the book of the Torah, why the revelation of the Torah was given in the desert. Now, you might have thought, and by the way, if you want a modern book on this theme, I highly recommend to you Professor John Levinson's book called Sinai and Zion, how Sinai represents one kind of religiosity, Zion, Jerusalem, represents another. You might have thought that the Torah should be given in the capital of the Jewish people, in Jerusalem, when they had arrived and built the temple. You might have thought the gift of the Torah belonged specifically to Am Yisrael in its particular homeland. a religion that would be focused not on its journey, but its arrival in the sacred mountain. In fact, the opposite is true. The Torah itself describes the gift of revelation, that most intense moment of divine and human connection, not in the homeland, but in the homelandlessness, in the sense of being on the journey through the wilderness. And the Midrash of the Mechilta, all the way back almost 2,000 years ago, notes those very same themes. It notes, in its own way of wrestling with universality, the applicability of Torah to every person in every nation in every place, and particularity, the specific experience of the Jewish people of Am Yisrael. It notes that the Torah was given in the desert, so you would not give an opening, shelo liten pitchon peh le'umot ha'olam, so you not invite the nations of the world to say, listen, the Torah doesn't apply to us. It belongs to the Jewish people. It's narrow, it's not broad. If Torah had been given in Jerusalem on that mountain, then all the rest of the world's nations would view it as Israel's own possession and not speaking to them. But the true wisdom does not belong to one people. The true wisdom is universal. So there's a way in which the Torah and Am Yisrael's experience is particular, but there is a way in which it is universal. And the fact that the Torah, in recounting revelation, places the moment of revelation not in the homeland, but outside the homeland, says that it does not apply particularly to this people only in its one place. It is broad, it is universal, and it invites all the world's nations to come and participate in its wisdom. The Midrash goes on to say, and another reason it wasn't given in the land of Israel is that if it had been given in one or another of the tribal homelands, that tribe would think to itself, we are the true possessors of Torah. If it was given, if the revelation happened in the land of Zevulun, the Zevulunites would say, the Torah really belongs to us, and the rest of you are secondary characters in Israel's drama. That's not how it is. It belongs to none of the tribes in particular, and thus belongs to all the Jewish people equally. And finally, that Midrash goes on to say that the Torah describes revelation as happening metaphorically as fire, as water, and as desert, to tell you that all those things are ownerless. Nobody owns the fire, nobody owns the water, and nobody owns the desert. Just like all those things are free for any human being to come and take, so too the Torah should be free for any human being to come and take. Another midrash, and this one I want to focus on and ultimately conclude with, speaks of the desert as a metaphor for a certain kind of spiritual openness. A midrash which probably was composed of homilies that were given in the ancient Palestinian synagogue, called the Pesikta de Rav Kahana, similar, maybe 4th or 5th century in the land of Israel, speaks of the gift of Torah in the land of in the desert, not in the land of Israel, in the following way: Mipnei ma nitna Torah b'midbar Sinai. Why was the Torah given in the wilderness as opposed to the homeland? Lelamdecha she'im ein adam mavkir atzmo kemidbar eino zocher ledivrei Torah. To teach you that unless a person gives himself, will add, or herself, over to the Torah ownerlessly and free as the desert itself, nobody can, unless a person does that, such a person cannot truly merit to attain words of Torah. This is a statement really about humility and a sense of surrender to a wisdom that is beyond your own capabilities. It's important to avoid self-interest. It's important to avoid feeling like what you're trying to do is demonstrate your own correctness, your own smartness. We all know that there's this thing called confirmation bias to the human mind. You think that things which affirm what you already thought, those are really smart things. And things which tend to challenge what you thought previously, those things don't seem to make a great deal of sense. In fact, what you want to do to be a Torah student, to be an absorber of Torah, is to make yourself, according to this midrash, like the desert. Don't be too invested in your own status, in affirming your own sense of your own correctness from beforehand. Open yourself wide to what, in fact, might be true beyond your capacity to understand. Relinquish the views that you were so tied to, and wonder if you might, in the study of your Torah, come to see the world differently than you would have originally. I find that in contemporary life, one of the tricks of teachers, one of the things that we often do, I also do this, is to ask students, often young people, we look at some passage in the Torah and we say, do you agree with that? Or do you disagree with that? And there is a quality in which that's an effective pedagogical maneuver. It stimulates kids or adults' moral reasoning. It makes them reflect on their own values, and it makes them question what their own values are. But there's a way in which I really don't like that, because what it says is to the kid or to the adult, you know what you think. You already know your own mind. Now let's look at the Torah and see how it coalesces or how it contradicts your own mind. This midrash from the Pesachta de Rav Kahana says, make yourself like the desert. Open yourself wide, not to what you already know is true, but what might turn out to be true in a way which surpasses your own mind. I think that to open yourself on the week of Shavuot, I want to say, to open yourself to some concept of revelation is to say that there are things in religion that you might not already know. That religion teaches you not only that you were right all along, how convenient is that, but religion asks you to open yourself up like the desert and see how can I be seized by wisdom beyond myself, and how can it change my life? I want to invite you in a kind of meditative quality to make yourself like the desert. See yourself in a vast open space, so big that you feel very small. You are overwhelmed by the vastness, power, and a truth that is not only about affirming what you already knew to your own self. I encourage you to try to feel that feeling that the book of Jeremiah describes about the people of Israel's journey. I remember your young love and faithfulness. You walked into the desert. You didn't already know what the outcome was. You walked into the desert to discover yourself on a journey. It's not about arriving at the truth that you can already glimpse. It's about pursuing a journey whose path is much, much bigger than your own. You don't know where it's going to lead you. You don't know where it's going to teach you. But the desert is itself so open, and you too can be so open, undefended, not assertive, but humble creature before something very, very vast. I wish you a good Shabbos as you read the story of the desert. I wish you, as we reach towards next week, a Shavuot of revelation in which you open yourself up to the truths that are not just the ones that fit our own human minds, but are glimpses and inklings of what is beyond our human mind. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.